Now, there's no two ways about it. I think we'll all agree that 2020 is going to be the year that's remembered for the coronavirus pandemic. But as we see lockdown measures starting to ease ever so slightly here in the UK, we've got the opportunity to get out a little bit more than we have done over the last few months and explore some of the green spaces around us. So I wanted to put a highlight and shine a bit of a spotlight on Wisley and Ockham Commons. It's a reserve that's intersected by the A3 and the M25 at junction 10 on the M25, and resultantly many of you watching this have probably driven past it tens if not hundreds or even thousands of times without really knowing what's here. So I wanted to take you guys on a bit of a guided walk around Wisley and Ockham Commons, show you some of the habitats, show you some of the wildlife, so that you can maybe consider popping out here for yourselves, having a nice time, getting some fresh air and hopefully seeing some good wildlife. Wisley and Ockham Commons is mainly comprised of lowland heathland, and that's characterised by dwarf shrubs and acid grassland species. So primarily things like heathers, gorse and broom. Those plants have evolved to suit a certain geological set of conditions, which are free draining, nutrient poor, acidic soils. And as you can see here, this sandy soil is perfect for these plants to establish. That's the main driver for creating this habitat type, and then we can now go and look at some of the wildlife that's evolved to live in these kind of conditions. Lowland heathland reserves like Wisley and Ockham support three key species of breeding bird, and they're ground nesting birds, and they're what give these sites their SPA or Special Protection Area designation. Now they're the European nightjar, the woodlark and the Dartfort warbler. The nightjar is a nocturnal bird species that feeds through the night on insects flying in the air, and around dusk time has this churring call which is unique to the nightjar and is quite a spooky sound if you've never heard it before. The Dartfort warbler is a small slaty grey brown bird that will live in and amongst the heather and low growing shrubs on our heath, and has a very scratchy warble and a bright red eye ring if you ever are lucky enough to see it, normally perched on the top of some heather. And then the woodlark, similar to the skylark, which most of you will know, has a more fluty call as it sings as it ascends in the air on its display flight, marking its territory, letting the females know it's there and it's after a pair. But if you want to see some other species, there are things like willow warblers, stone chats are very frequent, which sound like two bits of flint being rubbed together when they're calling. And then there's some pretty exciting birds of prey as well. Things like the hobby have started to arrive over the last few weeks, and that's a bird of prey that will hunt dragonflies and things like swallows and swifts on the wing, and it's one of the few birds that's able to do so. So bird life is a great way to get into spotting wildlife on our heathlands, where some of the wildlife can be a bit more secretive and a bit tricky to spot. As well as the classic dry areas of heath on sites like Wisley and Ockham Commons, we have patches of wet area where there are ponds or standing water or streams, and these attract a different assemblage of flora and fauna that are suited to these wetter conditions. Some of the classic examples will be things like amphibians, so newts and frogs and toads, but we also get good biodiversity within the dragonfly and damselfly families. There's some massive dragonflies, things like the golden ring dragonfly and the emperor dragonfly, that can frequently be found on our heathland sites, as well as some of the more smaller and more delicate damselfly species like the large red and the small red. For me personally, one of the most fascinating groups of animals on Wisley and Ockham Commons are reptiles, and we're lucky that we have 6 species of native reptile in the UK, and Wisley and Ockham support 5 of those 6 species. The only one we don't have here is the smooth snake. So we've got sand lizard, slow worm, common lizard, grass snake and adder. Now, when you're out on these sites, it's worth knowing that these reptiles don't really want to be seen. They're very secretive animals, they're pretty shy, they're under threat from predation from birds of prey, from mammals across the site, and they don't like to be disturbed. Throughout the whole year, we're doing a variety of habitat management works on our nature reserves to make sure that we're trying to keep them in the best condition possible for the maximum amount of biodiversity, or to protect rare and vulnerable species. And over the summer months, that can become a bit tricky because there's ground nesting birds, everything's growing, so we need other ways of doing it. And these chaps behind me are our belted Galloway cattle that do our conservation grazing for us. Now they're here to keep in check things like some of the rank grasses like purple moorgrass, but occasionally they'll browse on the odd bit of scrub as well, like silver birch, but their main diet is going to be grass and dealing with the purple moorgrass. The action of the cattle moving around the site and eating this grass will enable some of the more delicate flora to get in and become better established, and that'll improve biodiversity throughout the site as a whole. So there you have it, that's the whistle-stop tour of Wisley and Ockham Commons. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's whet your appetite to perhaps come down here and see some of this wildlife for yourself. If you do decide to visit, there's a few simple rules that we'd ask you to stick to when visiting the site, which is simply stick to the paths, especially if you've got dogs. We don't want them charging off through the heather and the undergrowth because they could disturb ground nesting birds. Please don't have any naked flames or barbecues, cigarettes if you can avoid it, because the sites are quite dry over the summer and there's an increased risk of wildfires. And please take your litter home with you. And apart from that, that's it. The A3 and the M25 dissect this site into four, so hundreds, thousands of people drive past this every day without knowing they're going past some of the rarest plants and animals in the UK and some of the rarest habitats in the world. And we're really lucky in Surrey to be able to say that we're playing a part in helping to conserve that. So it'd be great if you were able to visit, let us know what you see, and if you're interested in finding out how you can help the Wildlife Trust more, please do get in touch.